I always used to be so insecure about how skinny my arms were. Honestly, a noodle had more shape than my arms. But when I learned how to actually train my biceps effectively, that's when everything changed. Aesthetics aside though, another thing that people don't usually realize about building strong biceps is that it's so important for your shoulder stability, your mobility, and reducing risk of injury. So bicep training is also kind of essential for long-term shoulder health. So at the end of the video, I'll give you my favorite bicep exercises so you can steal them, and I'll show you how to structure them into your workouts, along with some bonus tips and mistakes to avoid to make sure you're training your biceps most optimally. This video is actually part of our muscle growth series, and we've been going through each of the different muscle groups, learning how to train all of them effectively to get the best results. So if you find this video helpful, make sure to go and check out the rest of the videos in the series, and maybe drop a little cheeky subscribe on your way over. Okay, back to biceps. The name kind of gives it away, but your bicep is made up of two different heads, the long head and the short head. Whatever exercise you do, whether that's a dumbbell curl or a chin up, both heads of your biceps are going to be used to some extent. But if you know how to target one more than the other, then it means you're going to be able to create more effective workouts and prioritize different areas of your biceps which might be lacking. But to make it easier to actually understand how to target each part of the bicep, we're going to do a teeny tiny little bit of anatomy. The biceps brachii has two heads. The long head lies more on the outer side of your arm and is involved in elbow flexion and forearm supination. It also plays a big role in shoulder stabilization and shoulder flexion, especially during overhead movements. As well as that, it contributes to the peak of the biceps when you're flexing. The short head's main role is elbow flexion, but it also assists in forearm supination when you're rotating your palm upwards. As well as the two bicep heads, there's also the brachialis, which lies underneath the biceps brachii on the front of the upper arm. It's mainly responsible for elbow flexion, regardless of what position you have your hand in. It's also a stronger elbow flexor than both of the biceps brachii, and is purely dedicated to powerful elbow flexion, adding to arm thickness. Okay, so targeting each head of the biceps is crucial if you want to build balanced arms. But before we jump into some tips to help you optimize your bicep training, first, there's some mistakes that you need to avoid. Mistake number one is trading tension for the stretch. In our video on how to grow your back, we looked at this study that emphasized the importance of training in the stretch position when we're training for hypertrophy. Even though this is still key when we're training the biceps, it's also important to emphasize that training the biceps with high tension in the stretch position seems to be more important than just the stretch itself. This recent 2023 study looked at how the resistance profile of different bicep exercises affected which part of the biceps saw the most hypertrophy or muscle growth. Participants were split into two groups and completed a 9-week resistance training program consisting of 4 sets of 12 reps 3 times a week of either incline bicep curls or preacher curls, and they performed each set to muscular failure. They found that the preacher curl caused significantly more distal bicep growth, which is the part of your bicep that's closer to your elbow joint. That's probably because with the preacher curl, you get a lot of tension when your bicep's in a pretty decent stretch. But then with the incline curl, you get pretty much zero tension even though your bicep's in a really big stretch. So it appears that curl variations that place the highest amount of tension in the range of motion where your bicep's in the most stretched position, those are going to be our best options in terms of muscle growth. Mistake number 2, curling in the squat rack. Just kidding, but seriously, if you're only using barbell curls to grow your biceps, then you're probably leaving gains on the table. Looking at how the tension varies throughout the barbell curl, we can see that it's not going to be the most optimal for bicep growth. The hardest part of the movement is when your elbows are at 90 degrees. Above that, the tension decreases, and then below 90 degrees, the tension decreases till it hits about 0 at the bottom of the movement. The biceps are also most stretched in the bottom position, and since there's little to no tension at that point, and taking what we now know from the study we just looked at, the barbell curl is really not ideal. You can still grow your biceps with them, but I personally never really use them because you can get a lot more bang for your buck with different bicep exercises, and the barbell curl just puts a bit more strain on your wrists. Mistake number 3, you've got to stop cheating your reps. If your bicep curls look like this, come on. Way too often I see people just swinging the weight around, and I know I've yapped about this before, but when you're using momentum to get the weight up instead of your muscles, then you're taking some of the tension off of your biceps and shifting it onto your stabilizing muscles. This means your biceps aren't going to potentially grow as much as they could, and you're putting yourself at a much greater risk of getting injured. If you do find that you tend to cheat when you're training biceps, there are some exercises that we can choose that will really limit your actual ability to be able to cheat just because of how they're set up. Take preacher curls as an example. When your elbows are locked in place in this movement, it makes it almost impossible to cheat by using momentum. Also, a lot of exercises where your arms sit behind your body more, like incline curls, drag curls, or behind the back cable curls, they do a really good job at helping you minimize that momentum. Stunning. So now you know to avoid those mistakes, here are my top tips for optimal growth. Tip number 1 is all about short head versus long head emphasis. If you want to work one head of your biceps more than the other, it all comes down to the angle of your arms. So you want to position your arms so that you're putting them in the direction where you're exerting the most force in line with the area of the bicep you want to target. Some research suggests that the long head may be activated more than the short head when you're doing curls in the scapular plane. And I know this might sound a bit technical, but really it's not that complicated and you can try it out right now. Start with your arms straight by your sides, then bend your elbows until you reach 90 degrees. Then, while keeping your elbows pinned at your sides, move your wrists outwards as much as you can, and this is the position you want to be in if you really want to target the outer part of your biceps. I like doing behind the back cable curls in this position because you also get the benefit of having the tension from the cable machine when your arm's in the most stretched position at the bottom of the movement. But you can also do a similar exercise using dumbbells. So while the long head is emphasized in external rotation, the short head is emphasized in internal rotation, and one of the best exercises we can use to put our arm in that position is a slightly adapted concentration curl. With regular dumbbell concentration curls, the downside is that it's most challenging at the top part of the movement when your biceps almost fully contracted. And remember, ideally we want an exercise that has the most tension near the bottom, most stretched part of the movement. So what we can do to adapt the exercise is use an incline bench or a preacher curl bench, angle your body sideways against it, then curl the dumbbell across your body towards your neck. This slight tweak to the exercise is going to help you target the short head just that bit more. Tip number 2 is mix low and high rep training. Similar to the triceps, the biceps lean towards being slightly more fast twitch fiber dominant, which means that using more like heavy and lower rep training is probably going to be quite beneficial. However, since the biceps are a mixture of fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers, using a variety of different rep ranges is going to be key. So for the best results, we're going to be combining heavier compound lifts like chin-ups with lighter isolation movements like cable curls. With the biceps, I feel like you need to be especially careful about the weight that you choose, because you need to choose one that's heavy enough to be challenging, but then not too heavy that it stops you using good form or limits your ability to progressively overload. Tip number 3, growth doesn't happen in the gym. I think I mentioned this in my glute growth video, but if you're not fueling your body properly, then it doesn't matter how hard you're training in the gym, it doesn't matter if you're doing the most optimal exercises or not, your muscles just aren't going to grow. I especially noticed the difference in how fast I saw progress when I started lean bulking, so make sure you're getting in enough carbs, enough fats, and enough protein to fuel your workouts along with the micronutrients. But I have a whole bulking playlist, so I'll make sure to link that if you'd like any more specific advice. If you find it hard to hit the nutritional goal that you set for yourself, then using supplements can also be a lot of help, mainly in terms of convenience and cost effectiveness. So I'll link the ones that I use and the ones that I think that are actually worth it in the description. Okay, so now it's time for the ultimate bicep workout. You can do this as a bicep workout of its own, or you can do what I do and add 1 or 2 of these movements to your upper body days once or twice a week. If you're doing that, you want to start off your workouts with your compound lifts when you have the most energy and you can put more effort into them, and then you're going to add in these bicep exercises, which are sort of more isolation movements. For your first session, once you've done any other compound lifts, we're going to start off with a compound lift for the biceps, which is chin-ups. This is technically a back exercise as well, but your biceps will be heavily involved just from the position that your body's in. If you can't do regular chin-ups yet, do not worry, I want you to do negative chin-ups. So basically what you do is step up onto a box or something, grab the bar so that you're already in the top position, and then lower yourself down. You want to be resisting the downwards force as much as possible so that you're really slowing down that lowering phase. This is going to help you get a really good stretch on the biceps, and I want you to do 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps here. Also, if the movement's too easy, if you can do regular chin-ups no problem, you can also add weight to this. So grab yourself a weight belt and start using progressive overload from week to week. The second exercise you're going to do is 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps of behind the back cable curls. The way you're going to set this up is position the cables at a medium to low height on a dual cable machine. You want to attach the handle attachments, and then grab the handles and take a couple of steps forward from the machine. If you want to slightly bias the long head, then pin your elbows in like we talked about earlier so that you're curling in the scapular plane. You want to make sure that you're keeping your elbows in a fairly fixed position throughout this whole movement, because that's going to make sure that you're putting most of the tension on your actual biceps. If you don't have access to 2 cables, then you can do pretty much the same movement but just one arm at a time. Okay, so that's your first workout. Now for your second upper body session, first we're going to start with 8 to 10 reps of incline hammer curl. I've not really touched on this much yet, so I just want to mention it now, but hammer curls are really good for targeting your brachialis. And this actually lies underneath your bicep muscles, but training your brachialis can help push out your bicep muscles, making your biceps look bigger. Hammer curls do an especially good job at targeting the brachialis because the brachialis's only job is to bend the elbow, so it doesn't contribute to supination at all. That means that doing hammer curls with a neutral grip can shift some of the tension off of your biceps and put it more onto your brachialis. You can do standing hammer curls, but I've chosen to do incline hammer curls here purely because it's going to help you limit the amount of momentum that you'll be able to use. Similar to the behind the back cable curls, you want to keep your elbows pinned in place throughout the movement just so that you're making sure that all the tension is going where you want it. For the second exercise, we're going to do 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps of preacher curls. For this exercise, you can do regular preacher curls, you can do machine preacher curls, you can do dumbbell preacher curls, or you could do the adapted variation of concentration curls that we talked about earlier. Personally, I really prefer the machine preacher curl because I feel a lot more stable with that setup and you can progressively overload it really easily. And I just find that I'm able to lock in and push a bit harder using the machine than if I was using free weights. Sometimes setting up the preacher curl can be a little bit confusing, especially if it's your first time. So what you want to do is adjust the preacher bench so your upper arms rest comfortably on the pad with your armpits flush against the top edge. You're going to be using an underhand grip and your hand should be about shoulder width apart. Sit upright with a slight lean forward so your arms rest flat on the pad but your shoulders are not lifted. Start by fully extending your arms but don't look out your elbows. You want to maintain the tension in your biceps. Keep your wrists in a neutral position and slowly curl the way up while keeping your upper arms pressed against the pad. Focus on squeezing your biceps to the top of the movement and then lower the weight back down with control. It's important to note that the exact bicep exercises, the sets, and the reps that you choose should reflect what you want to work on. My advice is to prioritize whichever head seems to be lagging most for you, and you can usually tell which head is less developed just by flexing. For some people, training the short head more will help their biceps look wider, and other people will find that they need to train the long head of the biceps more if it's not as developed. If you're still a beginner and can't really tell which head of the biceps you need to work on most, I'd recommend just follow a solid workout routine that builds your biceps to the point where you can actually recognize if one head's more developed than the other. And the easiest way to do that is just follow a tailored program that covers all the basics and lays it all out for you. Next week, I'm going to be launching my complete training and nutrition app that's going to help you do just that. Everyone who signs up will get a plan made specifically for them because we all have different starting points, and I truly believe that the exact approach that works for one person might not work for the next. So pop the sign up link in the description and I can't wait to see you inside. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Go grow your biceps and subscribe because you're a real one now. You are officially a real one because you made it this far in the video and I appreciate you so much. But as you know, you can't build muscle if you're not fueling your body properly. So if you want to learn more about lean bulking, check out this playlist next. See you there.